Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Ben Gurley. I'm a partner at Heartwood Wealth Advisors. And thank you all for attending today. We're excited to have Margaret Bolton here with us today. She is the CEO of College Solutions, a college prep consulting firm that helps students as early as sixth grade in terms of the kind of navigating the admissions process for colleges and finding the best fit for those students. So Margaret started College Solutions in 2012. She's the CEO, and she received her undergraduate at University of Virginia and her master's in public administration from American University. And she was also an admissions officer at UVA. So we are thrilled to have her here today. We will have a Q&A at the end, so please have your questions ready. And for those of you on Zoom, welcome. And you can submit your questions in the chat, and then I will submit those to Margaret at the end of the presentation. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll hand it off to Margaret now. And thank you so much.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. And good morning to those of you on Zoom. I'm so glad to be here. I am Margaret Baudinet. As I was mentioned earlier, I worked in admissions at University of Virginia. I went to UVA for undergrad. I did do some postgrad research at Oxford, so I lived abroad for a little while in the UK. And then came back and worked as a political speechwriter on Capitol Hill, and then worked in admissions at Virginia before starting College Solutions here in Richmond. I've been private coaching in college admissions for 10 years, and I do have a team of folks that work with me, as you can see on your handout, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But today's really not about me or my team. It's just to teach you kind of what colleges are looking for in this process and how you can help your kiddos work through this through high school and help them to balance their life and not be so stressed out about where they're going to get in or if they're good enough or any of those questions that I'm pretty sure they're coming to you with. So I hope that you will take some good information away from today. And I love questions, so you're actually welcome to throw them at me at any time. I teach these sessions a lot, so you're welcome to just interrupt me. Doesn't bother me. Anything you need, I'm glad to help. Okay, so I've told you about myself. Just to give you a little bit about my team. So you've met me. I do have a team of an operations team that runs kind of the business for me and helps me counsel students, because counseling students is really my favorite thing. In working at admissions at Virginia, I found that I love teenagers. That's kind of my favorite age to work with. I have 5-year-olds, which is not my favorite age right now, but I do love working with teenagers, and my administration team really makes sure that the business is running so that I can counsel students alongside my other staff members. These are the other counselors that work on my team. They all have their own kind of specialty. We have one athletic guru who knows all the ins and outs of athletic recruiting and athletic admissions. We have one West Coast guru who knows all there is to know about West Coast admissions. If you're interested in University of California schools, she's very knowledgeable about those. We have one person who worked at Northwestern University who knows all about top tier admissions. So really kind of a wide variety of perspectives. So if you come to us and say, I think I want to go play tennis at Denison, can you help me? You can talk to Aaron. Or if you want admissions to Williams, you should talk to Patrick, because he helps students really compile competitive applications to top tier schools. First, I'd love to tell you a little bit about how COVID is changing the admissions environment. We knew that it would. It's changed everything in our lives, really. But I wanted to talk you through how it's changed the admission world so that you can kind of prepare your students of what they should expect when going through. As of November 16th, which is the best data I could get, the number of college applications, the number of applicants had increased 13%. And the total applications had increased by 22%. So what does that mean? There are more students applying to college now. There are more students that are 4-year institution ready. It used to be that more students were applying to 2-year vocational schools. And more students are applying to more colleges. So in our caseload, it used to be that students applied to 8 to 12 colleges. it is now typical that students are applying to 12 to 20 colleges every year. It's a lot. The reason being is that because there are more applications to these colleges, there is a lower likelihood of a student being admitted to these colleges. So students are then applying to more colleges, which then makes the problem a larger issue, and then it just repeats itself. So if you have a student that's kind of coming down the pike, looking at senior year, I would prepare them to apply to at least maybe 2 more safety schools and maybe a couple more reach schools. The strategy we live by is a 2-4-2 strategy. So 2 safety schools or likely schools, 4 possible or 50-50 schools, and then 2 reach schools. That gets you to 8. If you want to grow that list, students can, but you need that core 8 in order to have a very secure place in the college admissions world. So that's the first trend. Yield protection. This is the next trend. This is what really annoys me about colleges right now. Many schools are worried about students saying yes to an offer. I'll use Case Western as an example. Case Western has what's called early action. So if a student applies by November 1st, they get a decision before Christmas, and that decision is non-binding. So that means they don't have to say yes if they are offered admission. What happened this year is a lot of my really smart students applied to Case Western. Case took a look at them and were like, oh, these are really smart kids. They're never going to say yes to us. So we're going to defer them to regular decision and see if they get in anywhere else. And then if they don't and they come back to us, then we'll admit them. Why are schools doing this? Yield, the percent of students that accept an offer to a college, goes into a US News and World Report ranking. Colleges are obsessed with their rankings. I know this from firsthand experience. So colleges are trying to be more strategic about how they protect their yield. Villanova did the exact same thing this year. They saw really talented students, IB students, top AP students, top SAT students, and they deferred them. Students that we would have assumed would have been admitted last year, flat deferred. And as I usually call these schools, I don't use students' names and just say, just curious, if I had a student with this kind of AP and this kind of SAT score, is there a reason they would have been deferred? And most of these admission officers were very honest with me and said, yeah, we figured they would be looking at other schools besides us, so we're just not sure we're ready to make an offer yet. Ugh, that's really gross, if you ask me. I ask if there's anything that a student could do to remedy the situation, and always the answer is demonstrated interest. And this is just a fancy word for making a college feel loved. So by visiting a college, by writing a thank you note to a college after you've visited, by writing emails to the person who's reading your application, all of those things count as demonstrated interest. A lot of these top students, despite my encouragement, will say, oh, Case Western's going to take me no matter what. I'm a great student. And so they don't demonstrate interest. And if they don't, Case thinks this kid's not going to take us. We're not going to take them. So a lack of demonstrated interest can cause a deferral and what we know is yield protection. That's a new thing that's happening. School grouping. A lot of students are very conscious of what high school they go to. I certainly was. I'm from Alabama. I went to a high school with 60 kids in my senior class. Colleges will compare students from the same high school against each other. So what happens is if your student goes to Trinity, or if your student goes to Maggie Walker or Freeman or any of these great schools in Richmond, they will take those students from the same school, sort them by GPA, and then check the decisions. So, if everybody above a 4.2 got admitted, looks great. There's one kid with like a 4.0 who got admitted, they'll go back and check that one. But maybe this student is, family is a donor to the university. Okay, maybe that makes sense. But the purpose of me telling you this is that your child is going to be compared against their peers at their school, which in some cases, students who go to Maggie Walker and some of these really top schools or the Leadership Center at Freeman or some of these magnet programs really struggle because all the kids are smart in their program. And so it's hard to distinguish themselves. This is where essays and interviews come in, which I'll talk about later. Summers. Summers have always been important. We've always worked on that with students, but we saw many students get deferred this year because of their lack of really impressive summer work. I've always encouraged students to get internships or job shadowing, but many colleges deferred or even denied students this year because they did not have somewhat of an intensive academic experience in their summer activity. So that could be working for a wealth management firm and analyzing some of their data. It could be doing research. It could be working in a lab. VCU has a really cool research program that's like 12 weeks here in Richmond. That's really cool. But for students who don't do something like that, they run the risk of getting overlooked in the process. Yeah. Good question. So the question is, what about summer camps? And a lot of parents have this question of like, my student's been going to this camp for years. Now they have a chance to be a counselor in training. Doesn't that show leadership? Like, how do we work that into the program, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at? I think those are great. What I encourage the student to do is to try to make something their own at camp. So maybe they can do, if they're teaching kayaking, can they come up with a cool way to teach kayaking to their students that they're teaching and then kind of take ownership of that? Or if they're just a camper at, the camp, can they win one of the awards? That would be great. But they've got to find a way to distinguish themselves. That's the answer. Okay. Last piece of trend is test optional. And this is what a lot of families come to me and say, oh my gosh, tests are not required anymore. We're feeling awesome about applying to blankety blank school. We really just need help with essays. And I take a really deep breath and say, well, test optional doesn't necessarily mean test optional. Schools, colleges are saying test optional because of COVID. Many students didn't have access to taking the SAT or the ACT. And so what they're meaning when they say test optional is if you don't have access to a test, that's fine. But if you do have access to a test and your family has the means to getting you test prep, then you probably should submit it. You can't see this, but I can send this out afterwards. This is showing you the outcomes of students who applied test optional at some of these top schools, as opposed to students who applied with tests. And the overall outcome is that students who applied test optional, it was harder to get into those schools. The reason being is that there are more students applying test optional, and so there's more competition for those spots in those schools. So if you don't have a data point for that SAT or that ACT, you're setting yourself back a notch, not necessarily altogether, but then you have to figure out how that student's going to then set themselves apart without that data point. Many families come to me and say, my child has dyslexia or a learning difference. We're not going to take the test. It's not the right fit. Totally get it. If you do that, then you need to find something else to help your child stand out, because just being well-rounded is not it anymore. Okay. Okay, so let's go through what it takes to get into a college. How am I doing on time? Okay, so this is what it takes to get into a school. And I've ranked it in order of priority for a college. So curriculum is the most important. Many students look at me and think I'm crazy because they think they have all A's or A's and B's and they're fine. Not so much. It needs to be a rigorous curriculum. So that's what I want to talk about first. Curriculum needs to have 5 core classes all 4 years of high school. Core class means English and foreign language, math, science, and history. Many students will say foreign language all 4 years. Are you sure? It depends. Depends on the school you're looking at. It depends on if you're going to be an engineer. Most engineering schools do not have a foreign language requirement. So if you think you're going to be an engineer, you can drop foreign language as a senior and take an extra math or science. That's okay. If you're not an engineer, which I'm not. So most students need to keep foreign language if possible. If they have a learning difference waiver, totally different. But if you can keep it, it's worth it. Why? Most students are miserable in a foreign language class. I get it. Most colleges have a foreign language requirement, and they'll say you have to take 2 years of a language in order to graduate from our school. And this is pretty much across the board. JMU, UVA, SMU, California schools, they all have it. So if a student comes into a college and they haven't taken their foreign language since 10th grade, and they go to take that placement test for foreign language, they're not going to do as well. And so then they're stuck taking more college level foreign language, which is not fun in my experience. If a student says, I don't care, like I'm stopping after I meet the requirement, okay, you have to fill the space where foreign language was with something equally rigorous. So students will say, I'm going to take out Spanish 4 and I'm going to put in Latin 1. No, sir, not the same trade. Spanish 4 and Latin 1 are not equal in rigor. So if you're going to take out Spanish 4, put in AP Euro. That works. Most students are like, no, thank you. But it would work, right? So think about level of rigor and what you're taking out and putting in. So that's foreign language. School context is really important. So what the school offers is what the student will be expected to take. So if a school only offers a few APs, that will be the expectation. If a school offers 25 APs, that will be the expectation. Students always say, how many APs is enough? I get the word enough every day in my world. It's really about taking as many most difficult classes as you can. Most difficult means the most difficult level in as many core classes as you can. But all of this is about balance, right? Because these kids are not robots. They are not built to take all the most difficult classes every single year of high school and, go off to, some really, really hard school. They're kids. They want to hang out with their friends. They want to play an instrument. I think that's great. So try to help them find the balance of taking as many most difficult classes within the context of their high school. That's important. Okay. AP versus IB. Does anyone here have an IB student or looking at an IB? Okay. IB is a great option. AP is a great option. I caution IB families of the writing rigor of an IB curriculum. And many families who have done IB would certainly agree with that. If you have a writer, IB is great. If you don't have a writer, IB is very challenging. APs work just as well. You have to be careful with the easy APs. And your students know what the easy APs are, but they're never going to tell you, I would imagine. AP Environmental Science, AP Psych, AP Human, AP Stats. These are considered easier APs. It is fine to take them. What is not fine is when you take out a harder AP, like AP Calc, and put in AP Stats. Then you get dinged for that. And maybe that's what you want. Okay, then take a harder AP Science and balance it out, right? Balance is key. You'll hear me say that over and over again. Most difficult writing curriculum. Most colleges, right or wrong, want students who can express themselves in the written word. So I encourage students to take whatever writing curriculum they can to improve their writing skills. A, it's going to be tested in college essays. And B, they're going to have to take writing requirements in college. The only colleges that don't have writing requirements are those with an open curriculum that don't make you take anything you don't want to take. And there are 7 of those in the United States. So unless they go to one of those, they're going to have to take writing classes. So I really encourage that. UVA, for instance, will waitlist a student who doesn't take AP English, just like that. Done. Last piece is magnet programs. I have a lot of families who do start with me in 6th grade, which terrifies the student, by the way, because they want to talk about magnet programs. And that's fine. Magnet programs in Richmond are a really big decision. Glen Allen versus the Leadership Center versus, some of the private schools, like, blah, which one do I choose? There are pros and cons to everyone. It's what kind of peer group do you want to surround your students with? All of them are great. Most of the in-state schools know these programs really well. It's when you get to the out-of-state schools that you want to figure out how these magnet programs get communicated to the out-of-state schools. And that's something I can help you with, or your guidance counselor can help you with. Grades and class rank come next. I always tell students you want more A's than B's. And an A minus counts as an A, and a B minus counts as a B. So whatever it starts with is what it is. And they only count A's in core classes. So like A's in music, A's in PE, those don't count unless you fail PE, which I've had a student do before, which is not okay. You cannot fail PE. But A's and B's is what you're shooting for in the core classes all 4 years of high school. And classes should trend upward. And by that, I mean, if you get a few A's in 9th grade, and then maybe 3 A's in 10th grade and 4 A's in 11th grade, lines going up, you're in great shape. As the classes get harder, the student's getting more adept in earning A's. Excellent. What you don't want is the reverse. All A's in 9th grade, couple A's in 10th grade, straight B's, maybe a C in 11th grade. That gets tricky because then as the classes are getting harder, the student continues to struggle. Colleges are going to look at that and say, is this student ready for college level work? If you have a student in that situation, the game is not over. Don't panic. I would encourage you to wait and not apply early to any colleges and apply regular to those colleges. So wait and apply in January so that you can use those first semester grades of senior year to pull your student up and really represent them with some stronger grades. They may not like that, but that's the better course. Class rank. A lot of schools do not rank anymore. They'll say, all of our students are great, we don't rank. Okay. Some schools will offer deciles, which is most of the cases in Richmond schools and most Virginia schools. They, on their school profile, which comes from your guidance counselor, they will offer this little box that says, between a 4.0 and a 4.5, we have X number of students. And between a 3.7 and a 3.9, we have this many students. So it just splits it up into slices of the class. That's helpful for an admissions office to know. It won't break a deal for admission, but it is helpful to know. So if your student is in the, very tippy top of the second decile, there are still plenty of colleges that are going to love your kiddo. So don't stress about it. Just know that that's going to get noticed on a school profile when the guidance sends in all the paperwork from the guidance counselor. Okay. Recommendations. Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend, if it's better to get like a B in an honors class than an A in a college class?
Great
Or
question.
like, what about a C?
A C. Mm-hmm.
That,
So question is the $1 million question. Do I get a B or a C in an honors or an AP class, or do I get an A in college prep, right? Ooh, colleges will say, take the hard class and just get an A minus, which is not an answer. That's a crappy answer. I always tell students, if you can take the harder class and get a B minus, then just take another class and get an A minus and balance it out. If you don't think a B minus is going to happen, if you think a C is inevitable, even with tutoring, even with going to the teacher, C's are not worth it. C's change the game. So if anything round is coming out of that teacher's grade book, cut it and run. Yep. Yep. C's bad. B's good. Mm-hmm. Any other questions while we're kind of paused here? Good so far? Has anybody panicked yet? You feeling good? Okay, good. Okay. Recommendations. Recommendations can make or break a student. So really encourage your students to cultivate these relationships with teachers. This is when students come back at me with, it's been COVID, I don't know my teachers, how do you expect me to do this? Think creatively, send an email, I don't know, Zoom with them, do something, because they have to write a recommendation for you. Guidance counselor at school must write a recommendation. That's required. And one academic teacher, preferably from 11th grade, could be from 10th grade, given that we're in COVID, is required for most schools. Schools like Alabama and South Carolina right now are not requiring teacher recommendations. It's just the guidance counselor. But I always say, if you've got a teacher that loves you, send it in. I always think it's nice to have more than one person saying nice things about you, even if they don't require it, send it. The teacher recommendation needs to be someone who knows the student, preferably inside and outside the classroom. So if this person is like a club sponsor or a track coach or something where they've seen the student do other things than sit in class, that's ideal. If you don't have that opportunity, that's fine. But I always tell the families, really try to coach the teacher on the recommendation, which sounds wonky, but it's not. When the student asks the teacher for the recommendation, put it in writing, number one. Do it in junior year, number two. And number three, give the teacher some ideas of what you'd like covered in the recommendation. I'm doing this right now with my juniors. So we're saying things like, "Dear Miss Smith, it's been so fun in your physics class this year. I specifically enjoyed learning about, Boyle's Law, blah, blah, blah. I've been working really hard on my participation in your class. I hope that you've noticed. Would you please consider this when you're writing my recommendation for college?" Done. Sincerely, blah, blah, blah. Okay. A, the request is in early. B, it's in writing, which teachers like. And C, it's offered some ideas of what we want covered in the file. All of those things are helpful to a teacher. He or she may not do it. We have no control over that. But at least we've tried, which is important in my mind. So guide the teachers as much as you can. So teachers, guidance counselor, wildcard rec. Some schools will allow a wildcard rec. This can be a coach, a mentor, a church leader, not a parent, not a grandparent. Many grandparents want to write recommendations. No, so sweet, but no. So someone else that knows the child in a different capacity. So if you've had the science teacher write a recommendation, maybe if the child's been on youth council, have that person, that sponsor, write a letter. Totally different capacity. You're trying to show different dimensions of your child, because the more that you can convince that admissions officer, who literally has about 5 to 8 minutes to read this file, that your child has more to offer than just a transcript and some test scores, the better off we are, right? So extra recommendation is encouraged. I always get questions about political and alumni recommendations. If you know the governor or the senator or the president, of course, have them write a recommendation. That is wonderful. If you know donors to the university, my word of advice is don't do a letter of recommendation. Talk to that person and have them go through their donor representative, their development officer. Preferably, and this is where it gets dicey, you want donors who have given high 6 figures, low 7 figures, which I know you don't want to ask, just how much money have you given? But if you know somebody's given $1 million, $2 million, you want them to speak up for your child. But otherwise, that's just something to think about. And if you have people like that, ask them nicely to represent your child in the process. Cool. Okay, testing. How am I doing? Good so far. Okay. There's SAT and there's ACT. A lot of families will ask me the difference. ACT has more questions per minute. So if your child is a quick thinker and they make decisions quickly, for better or for worse, ACT may be better for them. In my mind, SAT is trickier because technically there are 2 right answers on the SAT. One is more correct than the other one. Some students love that. I hate that. I've taken both tests recently because I like to know what the students are doing, and I'm that weird old person in the testing room. But I figure I need to know what they're doing. SAT requires more logical reasoning. ACT is more straightforward. Have your student take practice tests of both and have them figure it out. It works. Most students take these tests 2 or 3 times. More than 3 times, their score is not going to go up. Statistics show. Don't force it. When to take it? Most of my students will start studying in 10th grade, the summer after 10th grade, and take it in the fall of junior year. Especially if they're athletes or they have a lot of after-school commitments. The earlier you take it in junior year, the better, because you're going to look up and then it's spring of junior year and then it's AP test in May, and then they're exhausted and they're grouchy and nobody wants to talk about it. So start early in junior year. Subject tests have completely gone away. These were SAT 2s where they tested subject matter expertise in a like physics or a math, completely gone away. Those have been dismissed. AP scores and IB scores still are a part of the admissions process. 4s and 5s on APs, I would submit. 3s are neutral. 1s and 2s, don't bring it up. You can pay the College Board $8 and they will hide the scores you don't like, which is super cheap if you ask me. And then for IB scores, 5 and above, I would report those. Sit on the other ones. Essays and interviews. I think this is one of, yeah, question. Oh, good question. PSAT. PSAT, it depends on what school you go to as to when you take it. Most students take it in 10th grade and 11th grade. This is a great chance just for your student to try it out and see what their scores might be. It's easier than the SAT, so it's not going to whop them upside the head, but it is a timed proctored test just to get a feel for how they like it. Okay, great question. Yeah, of course. Great. So the question is, will every guidance counselor or every teacher write something positive? I have seen negative recommendations before. Yeah. That's why you choose someone that you know loves you. Just, you really want to think strategically. Most teachers these days will come back to the student and say, I don't think I'm the best choice, which I appreciate. But yeah, you want to think about that. Yeah. Great question. Are ACT and SAT treated equally? Yes. And you can submit both. If you have 2 scores that show that you're smart, tell them. Okay. Essays and interviews. This is the subjective information that goes in a college application. The essays start with a personal statement, 650 words, and it's capped at 650. And it's basically, tell us who you are. Students struggle with this. We spend a lot of time in June brainstorming with our students of who are you? What do you want to say? What are you passionate about? We help students outline essays. We edit the essays. We do everything because it's so intense for a kid to like get this out of their heart. That's 650 words. Then you have these additional supplementary essays that are specific to each college. So Virginia Tech has 4 of these essays that are 125 words each. Virginia has 2 essays. UNC has 2. Wake Forest has 7 essays, which is insane if you ask me. Depends on the schools you're looking at. I really like to recycle essays. So if you're applying to Wake Forest and Denison, they have the same question. So you can write 1 essay and answer 2 schools' questions. So I really try to help the students be efficient. So look at all the schools to which your student is applying and help them decide which essays to use because you can double use them. Yeah.
From Zoom. So this is from Michelle. It's if your child scores under the mean score for a school, example, UVA 1400, is it better to submit it or not, assuming they are close?
So the question was, if your child's score, SAT score, is under the mean, which is the average score that a student gets admitted at a certain school. For UVA, it's about 700 in each reading and math. Do you submit it or do you not, is the question. It depends on what the rest of the record looks like. If the rest of the record is really strong, solid APs, solid grades, submit the score. If the rest of the record has a few bumps in it, I wouldn't submit the score. You always want to lean on the part of the record that is the best representation of your child. So if the record has a few bumps in it, you don't want to add another bump to the record. That's what I'm trying to say. So look at the record as a whole and think about it that way. Yeah. Okay. Interviews. These are still a very big part of the application. William and Mary does them, they're required. Wake Forest does them, they're required. Bates, Bowdoin, all the Ivies, if you're even looking there. Let's see who else does them. Some of the liberal arts schools like Sewanee, Denison, they all want to talk to these students before they apply. And this is a new skill for most students, to sit down and have someone look at them and say, tell me about yourself. I like to practice. So please practice with your children of tell me about yourself. What do you want to major in and why? What 3 words would you use to describe yourself? What's your strength? What's your weakness? All of these questions come up. I will say Wake Forest has a bit of an odd interview in that they ask some kind of off the wall questions to get the student to think creatively. This year it was, if you could be the cow or the pig, which one would you choose and why? I still don't know why they asked that. William and Mary ask a lot of questions about books. So if your child is not reading or listening to podcasts, really encourage them to do that. I always do a podcast and summer reading list for my students of like, if you like mysteries, here are some cool books. If you like video games, here are some cool podcasts. Just stuff to get them outside of their brain, because colleges really ask and they need to have things they can refer to. So as much as you can, incentivize, encourage reading, podcasts, audiobooks, that all comes back in a college interview. These are just some sample questions that colleges ask. If you were going to give a speech at the White House, what would your speech be? That's a UNC question. Chicago asks, how are apples and oranges supposed to be compared? I still don't know how to answer this. UVA asks to tweet or not to tweet. Wake Forest asks, give us your top 10 list. Top 10 of what? You have to figure it out. Activities. This is the last piece. What is the right answer for extracurriculars? I have many parents who call me and say, just tell me what my kids need to do. Just tell me. The right answer is sustained commitment. They need to find something they like and stick with it. It does not matter what it is. I have one student 2 years ago that was really into baton twirling. Cool, that's great. I have many students who are athletes. Fabulous. Athletics takes up so much time. So colleges know that. But if you are an athlete, you really need to have some community service alongside it, because you can't just be an athlete anymore. You need to have more than that. I do encourage leadership, and it can be informal leadership. So if you are an athlete and you help plan the warm-up, that counts as leadership. If you are, a cellist and you work with your private tutor to decide what the symphony is going to play at the next round, that's leadership. It doesn't have to be president of the National Honor Society to be a leader. You can really develop leadership in a lot of different ways. And when a college asks for leadership, don't just think labels. Think about skills, soft skills that really trigger a student to be a leader. Work experience. I always think it's nice for a student to have some work experience. Doesn't have to be every summer or the whole summer. Many of my students work at Wegmans or Publix or, an ice cream shop or something like that. It shows an ability to communicate. It shows ability to show up on time, maturity, all of those things. So if that's something you're toying with, colleges like that. Research. Research is really for tippy top students. So if you are looking to go to a selective college, so colleges selecting less than 30% of the applicant pool, you need research on the application. So VCU has a program, Tufts has a program, Texas Tech has a program, but you need research. We have one student this year we found at Roanoke College who's doing really cool philosophy research. And so we matched him up and he's going to do research with him. Cool. But you got to have research if you're looking at top tier schools. Practical experience only applies to nurses, architects, and engineers. So if you have a student that's looking at a more specialized major, they need practical experience in the field. So for architects, I always say you've got to shadow somebody. For a nurse, it's hard right now because of COVID, but you can go to one of these camps where they simulate a lot of medical procedures. You've got to do that. Engineers, you've got to do an internship. Practical experience is critical for those applicants. Last thing is pay it forward. So this is what I was referring to with athletes. Athletes need community service to kind of balance out their record. And the best way to do this is with PFAs, with pay it forwards. Pay it forwards mean you take something you love and you give it to a community that doesn't have access to the same things that the student does. So if a student plays lacrosse, could they get with a couple buddies and teach kids, on the East End how to play lacrosse a couple days during the summer? That counts. That sort of thing always shows community service. It shows leadership. You can even turn it into a business. That's not community service, but it shows business sense. I've had some students who play soccer and they started a soccer camp in their neighborhood where they just teach their neighborhood kids how to play soccer. That works, shows maturity, entrepreneurship, all kinds of good stuff. Scholarships. I went to college on a Coca-Cola scholarship because my parents were not interested in paying out of state at UVA. Coca-Cola is a great merit aid scholarship. I sat on their board for many years. It is right now, I think it's $40,000 a year. So that wouldn't pay for UVA out of state right now, but it's great to look at. Dell is also another private scholarship that's for students interested in technology, and the Elk Foundation Most Valuable Student Scholarship, another merit-based scholarship. And you don't have to be an Elk to be qualified. All of these are ones that I recommend to top students who are really interested in getting free money. And all of these scholarships are stackable. So I had one student last year who got Coca-Cola and Elk. So she got 52 grand to put on her tuition to Williams College. Still had more to pay, but it was less than she would have had to pay. So those kinds of things are great. You can also expect some institutional aid from colleges. This is money from the college that typically comes from their endowment. And this has nothing to do with your financial need. So nothing to do with assets or income. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So the question is, can you negotiate with colleges? Yes, you certainly can. This is called the appeal process. We do this for families. You can do it on your own. You just write a letter to the financial aid office to say, we really want to come to your school. We have another offer on the table for XY amount. You have to tell them the amount that they're competing against. Do you want to reconsider your merit-based offer? Typically, they come up an average of 5K, which not a ton, but better than nothing. And 5K times 4 is, a nice vacation. So something to think about. Yeah. So be prepared for schools to offer you institutional aid based on the student's merit, and then also have the student look for private-based merit aid basically on the web. And these scholarships are everywhere. So that's something to consider. Some schools require FAFSA for merit aid. FAFSA is that horribly miserable form you have to fill out for financial aid. Some schools want you to fill it out so they can award you merit aid. Doesn't make any sense, but you'll have to check out each school to see if they require it. So just keep an eye on that. Appeals we talked about. Pay in full is another tool that you can use if you're able. So some colleges will say, if you're able to pay us in full for all 4 years, we will lock in the cost of tuition. The rate of college tuition is increasing at twice the rate of inflation right now, including the cost of inflation right now. So if you have a chunk of change sitting somewhere and you can pay for college in full, it will probably save you money, which is scary but true. Okay. High school nomination applications. These are for like the Jefferson at UVA, the Johnson at WNL, the Moorhead at UNC. Your high school can nominate children for these. You have to check with guidance counselors for that. Lastly, the app that I use to look for scholarships, it's called Scholly, SCHOLLY. And that is a free app. You input the student's academic data, and then it will show you options for not need-based, but merit-based aid. Okay, whew, 52 minutes, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Great question. Some schools will offer in-state tuition as kind of a merit-based scholarship. That does happen, mostly at the University of South Carolina. So South Carolina to out-of-state students will say, hey, you're really smart. Would you want to come here if we offered you the ability to pay in-state tuition? My response to that is yes, and can I pay in full? Because then you've locked it in, if that's an option. But yeah, South Carolina does it. Alabama has done it before. Auburn has done it before. Georgia never does it. Georgia's getting really popular, so be careful with them. But yeah, it's South Carolina usually. Yes. So on every scholarship, you want to make sure you understand the fine print. So with South Carolina, the in-state tuition is a grade-based renewal. So the student has to maintain a certain GPA. So anytime you get an award from a school, you want to read the fine print of you have to be on this campus. Like Penn State will say, we'll give you $20,000 if you'll go to the Altoona campus, which stinks. Don't go there. You only want to be at University Park. So we always turn that down and then appeal it for University Park. But make sure you understand the fine print. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. It's a great question. So I was referring to earlier about yield protection and how a lot of these schools are, sure. So the question is, a lot of these schools have deferred students. Is it possible to go back and apply later in hopes that the schools have undercalculated and maybe there's room in the class at a later date? Did I sum that up? Okay. I hope so is the answer. Colleges have never been this stringent on the deferral policies. I think they're going to get burned, quite honestly. I think a lot of these students have said, you've deferred me, you're not interested, I'm not interested, no thanks. So I think a lot of schools are going to end up under enrolled, and they may go back to a lot of students and say, hey, we're really sorry we deferred you. Do you want 15 grand? Like, do you want to come? Maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. But I think there's going to be a lot of movement in April. Yeah.
Zoom question. It is, do you recommend applying early decision?
So do I recommend applying early decision? Early decision is when you apply, you're saying to a college, if you admit me, I'm coming. Despite the financial aid offer, despite any other factors, I'm coming. This typically doubles or triples your chances at the most. Sometimes it like increases it by 10%, but usually doubles or triples. From a strategic standpoint, sure, I think it's a great idea. Some students are not prepared to apply early decision. Some students say, I don't know that I love that school enough to say yes. You know, I love UVA and I love Christopher Newport and I love JMU. Like, I don't know who I would say yes to. I can't commit. Some students are like, yeah, I love CNU. Let's apply ED and call it a day. So one, student commitment is a question. Two, finances is a question. Are you prepared to say yes to that school despite whatever their financial offer is? Because as soon as you apply an early decision, you're giving them all the leverage because they know they've got you. So the merit offer is probably going to be less. So is that okay with you? So sure, it's a good strategic move, but is it the best financial move for you? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great question. So the question is, are there other colleges that start you at a different campus and then bring you into the main campus later? Yes, so many schools do this. It is their way of packing the freshman class and preparing for some students to drop out or transfer. 27% of first-year college students drop out or transfer after their first year, and colleges know that. So they are preparing for the worst. So by starting students at different campuses, they can then bring those students in after first year. So Penn State does it, UVA does it, Boston College does it, Northeastern does it. Let's see who else I'm missing. UNC does it. Lots of them. It's very common. Maryland does it. Yeah. Global. Yep. Mm-hmm. Great question. So UNC has a program called Global Launch. The question is, how do you even know that these schools have these programs? Usually it's a teeny tiny checkbox on the application. And they will ask you, do you want to be considered for Global Launch? Most students are moving so fast through the app, they don't know what they're checking, which is why I always tell a student, you're not allowed to submit without me looking at it. But it's always on the checkbox. So Northeastern does this, where they send students to Europe for a year. Oh, darn. SMU does it, where they send students to Europe for a year. UNC does it. So it's a way of taking more freshmen and then bringing them in after freshman year when a lot of students have transferred. Yeah. Other questions? I know it's a lot. Yeah.
I've been hearing more about private schools having to already prepare with the majors.
Also a good question. So the question is, we've heard that schools are making students declare an interest in a major before they apply or when they apply. That is true for most schools now. It's typically not set in stone, but it gives a college an idea of where they need to put their resources. Because if you say, I'm interested in the classics, and they only have 2 classics professors, they're going to keep in mind that they only need 7 kids in the classics or whatever. So you want to be careful with what major you choose, because if you choose one of these more random ones, it may be harder to get in. Right now, overall, computer science and business are the hardest to get in. Then comes nursing, which is crazy because we need nurses like we need water right now. But yes, choosing your major before you apply can determine how competitive the process is. Yeah.
So in that scenario, you brought up business, right?
Mhm.
So it's already applied, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Hey, if you take the business,
Yeah.
then, right, then all of a sudden you're going against a bigger group of folks.
Yep.
Picking basket weaving, right? Then you can't get in under basket
Mhm.
weaving. then
Transfer.
move into business your sophomore year, so you're-
Mhm. Stuck.
Right.
Depends on the schools. So like for UVA, for instance, I always tell students not to. So question is, if you are interested in business, do you apply as a business major and compete with all those other business kids that are supposedly more competitive? Or do you apply as a different major that may be less supported at the university, but then potentially lose a chance at becoming a business major down the line? Depends on the school, number one. For some schools, they will say, if you're not a business major when you come in, you're not going to be a business major. So if that's the case, you need to go in directly as a business major and take your chances. Some schools will say you have a chance to transfer as a second year. That's when I have the student write an email to the person who's going to be reading their file and say, listen, I'm interested in business, but I'm not sure I'm ready to pull the trigger. I have some other interests, including XYZ. Would you recommend I apply as a business major, or could I apply as a sophomore? If they say you could apply as a sophomore, then let them apply somewhere else. Yeah.
In the Zoom question here, when you apply early and are deferred, are
Mhm.
you not just put in the pot with the kids that are applying regular decision?
Pretty much. So the question is, if you applied early decision or early action and you're deferred, what happens? You are put in the pot with all the kids who applied regular. So then you don't find out until at the latest April 1st. You guys look exhausted. Any other questions? Okay. I left business cards up here. If you have other questions, you're welcome to email me. I'm glad to help you. But know that this is all about balance for your kiddos. They're not meant to be robots. And we're really just trying to support them, which I know is your goal too. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you, Margaret. That was great.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming, and thank you on Zoom for attending. We're gonna have a recording of this, which we'll send out to everyone. So you have this to look back on, but appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Mhm.